Hey guys, welcome to Film Darkly. I'm Anthony Pacino. So today I wanted to bring you a horror review. I tend to review a lot of horror, but that's mostly because that's all I watch. Um, so I was looking at a list of top 25, or I think it was 25. Yeah, 25 werewolf movies. And someone had brought up this movie called Howl. And I decided to check it out because I'm a werewolf fan. I love werewolves. And, this is a really interesting film. Came out in 2015, directed by Paul Hyatt. I think it's how you say his last name. It's written by Mark Huckerby and Nick Ostler. Starring Elliot Cohen, Rosie Day. These are like a lot of nobodies, obviously. Like I'm giving you all these names, and these are people like you never heard of. And it's one of those movies that I think just I don't know if it was a straight to video movie. It was made in the UK, so it's all UK actors and everything, and that part of the reason why you probably haven't heard of it, why I hadn't heard of it up until just yesterday, really. So I went ahead and checked it out because it was a movie that I constantly passed by on Tubi, and I would never check it out because the poster to me just didn't look good. It looked kind of like this really ratty B movie, because it had like the typical horror posters of B movies where they show you the creature on the poster. And it was like, really? I can't stand when people do that. I just don't think you should show anything on the poster that's relevant to the creature. I think that the posters, your posters, in my opinion, your posters should attract people, but it should always be like kind of vague on what you're really selling them. I'm also not a fan of like titles that just straight tell you stuff. Like, when I did Prey by Night, it's Prey by Night, it kind of can allude to a werewolf film, but you really don't know at the same time. Like, it could be anything. It could be just a killer. And, the trailer, though, gave away that, there was a werewolf in it. But this one is just kind of like, I just don't like those posters that are so, like, blatantly, here's the werewolf. It's funny because Howl has like 1,000 other posters that are way better. So what the movie's about is it's about this guy, and his name, I think it's Adrian. Yeah, Adrian's his name. I think that's the guy. I have to look at his picture. I think he was no, he was not the main character. Who is the main character? For some reason, they have this thing in like a weird order. Probably because all the main actors are like so unknown. So what happens is in IMDb, they kind of list everyone out of order because of just because of that fact. So now I have to dig this dude up, and I don't know who he is. Sam Gittins is his name. I didn't even say his name, and the movie like stars this guy. I think that's the right guy. To be honest, I don't remember the main character's name. I thought it was something different. So it's kind of odd because I'm having to dig through all these people, and I know it's not this Kelvin guy. I'm pretty sure it's this. It shows you how much the characters are not super memorable, but oddly enough, I actually thought it had good character development. It's just a lot of the characters kind of go without their names ever being said, which is really a really interesting way of going about it. But I think it's this Sam Gittins guy. Yeah, that's him. So anyway, Sam Gittins plays a character named Billy, and he is essentially this really, I don't know, kind of guy that can't really get anything done. He's kind of like a weak human being who wants a raise but doesn't get the raise, and wants, or a promotion actually, and doesn't get the promotion, wants the girl but can't get the girl. He's not really very tough and all this stuff, and he works for a train company. And so he's just basically one of those dudes, one of those, not a conductor or anything. He's just one of those guys that strolls the thing and collects the tickets, and that's pretty much all he does. He's like a customer service type guy. And I don't know the exact name of what you would call someone who does that. So they're on this train, and they're getting ready to start. He's starting the day, and he's doing a red eye, so he's doing like the middle of the night shift. And the train gets going, and he's meeting all these people trying to get tickets. And through this, him, checking tickets, you meet all these characters, and you get a little bit of their attitude. You get a little bit of their identity as an individual, and like who they are as a person as he's going through. Some are jerks, some are, cool with him, some are just don't care about his existence in a way. And that's basically how this goes. Suddenly the train doesn't derail, but it stops. And they can't figure out why it stopped. And the train engineer jumps out, and he tries to go, or conductor, he jumps out the train. He goes to try and check what's happened. And he finds a deer caught under the train. And he starts to try and pull it out, and something gets him. Something happens. And from there is where the movie begins. And basically these people are stuck on this train that is surrounded by what they think is one werewolf, and what they find out to be more than one werewolf. And all these crazy events just transpire. It's basically these people trying to figure out what they're going to do. It's not a very long movie. At least it doesn't feel very long, because it does keep you very entertained. It's only an hour and 32 minutes though, and it has a really solid first act, and it's really well filmed. It's not cheap in the slightest, but has a really good first act. Then it has a really good second act. But one of the things they do in the second act is they finally reveal a werewolf, and they kind of do it in the worst way possible, where you could see this thing very well. And it isn't a man in a suit. It's like CGI, and it's not good CGI. And this is where the movie, for me, kind of like, I was like, oh, why'd you do that? Especially because the rest of the movie, whenever we see a werewolf, they're always in the dark. There's always a little bit of darkness over them, and they look good. And some of them look like people in suits. And the very, very ending, there's like all this, kind of daylight, and you see a wolf, which, yes, I don't understand that either. I thought it was like a full moon thing, but maybe this movie doesn't really give you the rules of these werewolves. You just, so who knows? They could have a different set of rules, kind of like in The Howling, where there's no such thing as like the full moon thing. They could essentially turn into a werewolf whenever they want. So similarly with this, it may be that they turn into it whenever they want, or maybe that they never even turn into a human. They're always like a werewolf, and werewolf is just the closest thing to what they are, but they're clearly different. And I think they look good the rest of the movie. It's just this one doesn't look good, because there's a little too much light on him at one point. There's like a flickering light on him, and you kind of see him standing there, and he's really big and bulky, and he's almost too big to the point where it's like, how do you even hurt him? And then he roars, and his face just doesn't look that great, and it just doesn't look good. And it's like, how does this one not look good, but the rest of the movie you guys managed to pull it off? And so to me, though, that ends up being the first mark of where this movie kind of derails, no pun intended. This movie has a great first act, great second act, and it goes into the third, and it falls apart. One of the things this film does is when the train gets stopped, literally like characters start to reveal their true colors. And that's great. because that's what a situation like that's going to do to you. You know, if you kind of come off a certain way, you come off like macho, all the charisma in the world, then suddenly a train stops in the middle of a forested area and you're like the big coward. And so it reveals people. And you kind of figure out who's who. But then when it comes to that third act, it's like suddenly they rely on these tropes. Like they rely on the horror tropes to kill off characters. And it doesn't really make sense because it's like, wait a minute, you just established that in a situation of survival, these characters can become this. So why is it that now, when the situation presents itself even further, they revert to this? You know, like give me an instance. There's a character in the movie who's reading a book, and he's kind of like this nerdy looking guy. I don't even think we ever get his name. I'm trying to look it up. I don't think we do. Oh, his name is Matthew. Okay. Excuse me. So we have this character Matthew in the film. Matthew sitting down, he's reading a book, he has his glasses on. When the train comes to a stop, he's actually more worried about his book than anything else. Then when they start to, kind of get into the situation, he seems a little afraid. You don't expect much from Matthew because he's this Indian dude who's just kind of this nerdy guy and sort of skinny and everything. And you just don't expect much out of him. Then when it comes to them fighting the wolf in the train, he's kind of the guy who ends up becoming the hero. And, I'm not going to say what happens, but he becomes the hero in the moment. And so you're kind of like, wow. This guy just showed he can be a different person. It's the same thing kind of happens to our main character, Billy. He transitions as the movie goes by. And that's fine. In fact, it's great when a movie can do that. When a movie can manage to kind of flip everything for us. And we see the characters change due to the fact that we're now in this situation that's life or death, and so who's going to step up? But it makes no sense to make them revert back, because later on when in the movie Matthew pulls a trope, and he's kind of all of a sudden reverts back to the guy we expected him to be, who is reading the book. Stereotypically, yes, but that's what he becomes. And it's like, how does he become that character? Like, why would you do that? And there's like one moment where a character kind of descends into this area we kind of don't expect them to be again. And then the movie does something that kind of almost says, oh no, we're not doing that trope. And it's really cool. But then they revert to another trope. And it's like the writer got to the third act and just didn't know what to do. Like they felt like they established, or writers, actually, it's two writers. It's like these gentlemen just didn't know how to finish this movie. And that was the biggest issue with this movie, was they had no idea how to finish it. They got to that ending and they were like, well, what do we do now? Let's try and get to this type of ending. Okay, well, we got to kill off the characters. Well, so-and-so does this. And, nobody thought, well, wait a minute. In Act 2, we established he's this now. Why can't he die doing that? And it doesn't make sense. Like, how can you forget the continuity of your character? How can you forget who your character is? How can you forget that? You shouldn't forget that. That's the last thing you should forget as a writer. You should know what you're doing, and you should be able to, your characters should remain consistent. The movie also tries to do a little bit of a twist at the end that you see coming a mile away, and it does a horrific trope to make that ending happen. And it's just this really bad way to end. So it's crazy. Like, you look on IMDb, and this movie is sitting with a 5.4 out of 10. And I can see why. This movie is a movie that has so much potential starting out. I mean, just tons of potential. When you start out with this movie, you're kind of like, oh, this is going in an interesting way. I mean, it has a positive on Rotten Tomatoes. Rotten Tomatoes gave it 67%. The audience score is a 37%. And only 15 people actually reviewed it professionally. But, there you go. It's like 67% isn't really that high, but it's at least above average. And I would say that's about maybe where it belongs, but you could probably go a little lower, because that ending just tears you apart. I mean, it's just, I don't get it. I don't get why they did that. And, I'm looking at some of the fan reviews, and, some people are like, oh, it's, a good movie, kept me on the edge of my seat, great characters, fast packed, and not bad special effects. It's, I guess. But anyways, it's just not, it really falls off it just really falls apart when it gets to that third act. And I think that's the biggest issue with this film. It starts out so strong. I'm going to give it a recommend and say check it out anyways, because I think it's worth watching. Like, when the first and second act are worth watching, that means majority of the film's worth watching. It just doesn't have a great, and it doesn't have a great third act. But if you don't notice things like that with characters, you might not care. This might be a much more fun movie for most people. Most people might not even recognize some of the odd character switches, and that's okay. Sometimes that happens. I could remember watching a short film once that I premiered, and we were watching this short film, and that's what happens with one of the characters. One of the characters is reacting. They're a typical kind of person. They get kidnapped, and then they start reacting a certain way, and you're kind of like, okay, well, this is what this person turns into when they fall into descent. And then suddenly you get to the third act and the ending, and the character just flips. And you're like, wait, we never established what could have made this character flip. This character just flipped for no reason. Like, we already saw them in this really bad situation. We know their true colors now. Why are all of a sudden they able to switch from that? There's no one there to train them. There's no one there to push them. There's no one there to do anything. It's just same exact situation. Now all of a sudden this is what they're doing, and it really just doesn't make sense. It's like your character becomes Ripley, and you never established how they became Ripley. Whereas Ripley became Ripley because it made sense. Her situation got really dire, and she became a survivalist. And then in Aliens, it makes sense why Ripley continues with that kind of personality, because she's been through a lot, and now this is who she is. She's become this other person, and she's leery of these creatures, these xenomorphs and all that. But your movie has to establish that. Your movie has to make that happen. And if your movie never establishes that, then I can't buy into it. That's the whole point when you have monsters, is your characters reveal who they are, and they should be different. And if they're whiny and they're crying and they don't know how to speak, then they need to remain that way, because you're not going to overnight suddenly change into a superhero. It's just not going to happen. That's the problem with Tom Savini's Night of the Living Dead. He never understood that, and he made one of his characters fall into dismay, and she was a woman in distress, and then he tries to pull her out of that by making her into some sort of action hero, and it doesn't make sense because nobody does that overnight. Nobody. And it's just, we saw her true colors. That's her true colors. That's her true self. You have to leave her there. You can't just suddenly say, oh, wait a minute, I think third act, she's going to become a superhero. Wait, what? How? When? What changed? What made her that way? You have to establish true colors as soon as the situation shows itself. You don't establish true colors and then somehow establish another set of true colors. You don't do that. If your character's a mama bear and they're going to protect their children, then they got to be a mama bear the rest of the movie. But if they're not a very good mama bear and they're descending into dismay and distress and they're just sitting there crawled up in a ball, you don't get to go to the third act and just all of a sudden, wait, my children are in danger, let me become mama bear now. It's like, no, you don't get to do that. Because human beings don't do that. It becomes super unrealistic and you destroy your characters. Now, don't get me wrong, characters are always a little bit unrealistic in film. They should always be a little unrealistic. Because if we did everything realistic in movies, it wouldn't work. Because real life is boring. Real life is really, really boring. And that's just the truth of it. Real life is kind of every day nothing happens and then bam, something crazy happens. That's what real life is. That's why we all get shocked. That's why we all get, like, weirded out. That's why we all kind of, that's why death is such a blow to us, to our ego and our personality and who we are, because it always comes out of nowhere to us, because we kind of don't expect it. And really, if we understood that, you do have to expect it like pretty much every day, then we wouldn't be as blown away when it happens. Even if it happens to somebody really young, because we would know. But that's real life. Real life is more boring. It's more, you have no idea what's going on. And we can't write dialogue for real. I mean, listen to how I talk. I'm constantly stuttering. I'm constantly I say a word. I say like a lot. I say a lot. I'm always kind of, I throw in there a lot. You can't write a character that way. If you do, you have to be clever about it. But you can't write a character like that. That's called idiosyncrasies. And while idiosyncrasies are good for characters, you have to make only one. And you have to really sit with that. I was watching this show called Too Old to Die Young. And there's this character where he constantly snorts. And that's his idiosyncrasy. Constantly kind of snorts, like almost like he's got all this phlegm and he just keeps pulling it up. And you're just you kind of get a little annoyed by it, but he feels real because of that. And while some people may actually have that idiosyncrasy, at the same exact time, they probably have a bunch of other things, and there's a certain beat to it where if you do it too much or if you go too far with it, it's not going to work. So you have to establish what you're doing, and you can't write characters who say and a lot like regular people do, because it comes off as unrealistic even though it's realistic. It annoys people. And that's the problem with idiosyncrasies, is sometimes you take the chance at annoying your audience, which you don't want to do. Unless you want your audience to be annoyed at that character, then you may want to consider that. If you want a character to come off really boring, have them talk like people in real life. Otherwise, if you notice, characters always get straight to the point in movies. Characters are always able to convey what they mean in movies. They rarely are unable to convey what they mean. And that's not realistic. We sometimes spend hours sitting in a room talking to each other before we can actually convey what we mean about something. Because that's what human beings are constantly doing. We're constantly bouncing ideas off each other because we're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. We're trying to figure out what's true and what's not true. We're always trying to figure each other out. That's why human beings converse. That's why you become more intelligent when you converse a lot, when you have discussions, because you figure things out. But in a movie, you're telling a story, and that story has to be told completely. And you have to understand that story, and you have to be able to follow that story. So there's no room for the dilly-dallying. There's no room for the let's play around a little and try and figure things out. There's no room for that. unless you make a movie that all takes place in a room where two people are having a conversation, which you can do. But again, your dialogue still has to be really key and on point. And that's the difference between real life and not real life. So that's why when you have characters and you have dialogue and you have all these things, you have to be able to establish things correctly. And when you watch a movie like Howl, you could see Howl's biggest problem is it's written badly. The one CGI part I can forgive. You can forgive it. You can kind of, okay, whatever. The rest is fine. So I'm okay with it. But when you're looking at characters, you cannot stay consistent. That's an issue. And I think, and if I had to take my guess, most of the people who gave it a low rating gave it that low rating because they really just sort of, they really honestly probably fell apart in that third act. They may not realize that's when the movie fell apart for them. But that is when the movie fell apart for them, was that third act. Because that third act is just really, really, really difficult. Which, by the way, I found out who the main character was, who for some reason is not listed on IMDb. This is weird. But his name is Ed Spillers. Billy was another character who actually was an engineer. Ed Spillers plays the character Joe, and I thought that was the main character's name. So it was really messing with me when I was telling you Billy earlier. It's Joe was his real name. Was his name, the character name, and I remembered that. And his name is, and the actor is Ed Spillers. He's not even listed on the IMDb for some reason. It's really weird. That's why I was tripping out, because I'm like, I didn't want to say the character's name was Joe because I thought maybe I just don't remember the character's name. There he is. He is listed, but he's listed like way down on the list. It's so odd. That is so odd. Has this guy like done nothing? Yeah, that's him. He looks so much like the other dude though. They do look a lot alike. Wow, that's a trip. Anyways, so there you go. The main character's name is Joe, not Billy. So Joe's the guy who's like this sort of wimpy character, and then he now the interesting thing is Joe's character does develop well, and his character stays consistent, and I like that. Billy's kind of doesn't really change. He's just kind of the same guy all the time. It's like, I don't know. I guess we're to assume that he just has military training or something and he knows how to, always remain a consistent person. Because most of the time when people don't have training, you kind of, you flip out when things happen. So anyways, that's my little talk on this. Obviously this became less of a review for Howl and more of a lesson on how you write characters. And by no means, my disclaimer is always, I'm not the best writer. So you're going to watch my short films and my characters might not be the best. But, that's what I shoot for. Trying to be consistent, trying to throw idiosyncrasies in there, but at the same exact time, always trying to have that same character. I remember there was a few lines I had to cut from Pray by Night because my main character, Nancy, sort of said these lines that just were so out of character, and I was like, why are those there? Like, it wasn't like I wasn't thinking. I was more going along with the narration of the story than thinking about the character. And luckily enough, when I did my edit, I caught that those lines didn't make sense and I cut them. So anyways, that's going to be it for me today. Sorry, this one's a little bit long one, but I had to talk about characters. So thanks for listening. Talk to you guys next time. Bye.